I just remember waking up. Yeah. Excuse me, everybody. We're going to get started. First off, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. Our speaker is Dr. Steve Miranda. He is the assistant leader at the Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit, Mississippi State University. He's also a professor of fisheries there. He's been extremely productive throughout his career. He has about 150 publications to his name, including 5 chapters in AFS books that serve as reference to professionals and students as well. His scope of work has ranged from fundamental fish sampling techniques to reservoir management at both local and continental scales. And notably, he was recently elected into the National Fisheries Management Hall of Excellence, which is a very big deal if you're not aware. So we're really, really fortunate to have him here speaking today. So please help me welcome him.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here. Thanks to Tucker for the nice introduction and following me around this last day. Yes, I come from the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries of Mississippi State, and it's just amazing how similar the two departments are in terms of the type of students, the disciplines of faculty. And I was talking to the grad students last night at dinner time, and in terms of all of the regulations, paperwork, and stuff that you guys have to do, we have to go through the same thing. So I feel like home out here. I was, before I came over, I was snooping through your website to find out who all was here. And I noticed that you guys got forest ranking in all the fish and wildlife programs in the country. That's awesome. That's quite an achievement earned by the faculty, the grad students, and whether you want to accept it or not, the administration, which, you know, they facilitate things or leave you alone when they have to. So that's quite an achievement. Congratulations. So I'll get on with my seminar. All right. So back in 1539, Don Hernando de Soto arrived into what is now Tampa Bay, Florida, and from there he took off north to explore the southeastern North America, and he was looking for treasure. He was looking for gold and silver. He zigzagged around the southeast for about 2 years, and in 1540, late in 1540, he arrived to Tupelo, Mississippi, which is just a few miles north of where I live on work. He spent the winter there, and the following spring, he continued west, and he found the Mississippi River. And this picture here, if you've been to the U.S. Capitol, it's hanging in the rotunda underneath the dome. It was commissioned by Congress in the 1840s, when it was done by William Kyle. Shortly after he found the river, Don Hernando died. He died in May of 1542, and he found no treasures at all. Almost 500 years later, another Spanish conquistador, Don Leandro Esteban Miranda, wandered aimlessly around the southeastern United States until he stumbled into the treasure. So I want to tell you a little bit about that story. Tell you a little bit about the Mississippi Alluvial Valley. That's this region that I have identified in here. And it's a flat agricultural area as indicated by the brown color, similar to areas in the Midwest, Central Valley of California, and around where we are now, just west of us. The area is extremely flat. It drops about 5 inches per every mile. And back in the early 1800s, it was known as a wilderness because of the bottomland hardwoods, which was almost impassable. But about 80% of that has been cut to support agriculture. This is a shot of what it looks like from the ground with the edge of the valley in the back. The area has quite a few floodplain lakes, which are identified in this figure. Anywhere between 1,000 and 3,000. It's hard to really identify when a lake becomes a wetland because of the somewhat linear succession process. These lakes represent channels left by meandering rivers, which are able to meander because of the flat terrain in the region. Oops. Back in 2006, I was asked by the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to survey the fish communities in this lake. Very little was known about it at the time. And the goal was very simple, to identify patterns relevant to developing strategies for conservation, restoration, and water withdrawal. The Corps of Engineers, because they do a lot of maintenance in the region to river channels in terms of channelization and levee building, they wanted to find out how could they do the work differently in order to enhance conservation and restoration. And MDEQ was interested on how much water farmers could withdraw out of the lakes, which are used for irrigation. So got started with that in the summer of 2006. We sampled 17 lakes that year, and on July 25th, we were scheduled to sample McIntyre. Now, I have a difficult time going straight from the office to the lake. I got to meander. I'm a history buff, and I like to find things here and there. So I'm going to meander a little bit in here. McIntyre Lake is located about 10 miles north of Greenwood. And there's a lot of cool things that's happening on these 10 miles in here if you take the time to look around. Show you a few of them. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Where the Soggy Bottom Boys go in there into a radio station, which is this one, which is about 2 miles north of Greenwood, and they cut their first record. But you won't know that unless you take the time to figure out why is that radio station in there. You keep going about 2 or 3 miles, there's a little country church in there, and behind the church is a cemetery. And if you walk around the cemetery, you're going to find a grave for Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson is arguably the father of the blues. There's lots of souvenirs that are left in there by people visiting the graveyard. Now, if you go all the way to Money, there's a dilapidated store, which is Bryant Grocery Store. I don't know if you guys have heard of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was that kid that came from Chicago to visit his relative, and he allegedly wolf whistled at a white woman, and for that, the woman's husband and brother, they took him out of his house at night to kill him, and they threw him in the Tallahatchie River, and that was what sparked the civil rights movement in the 1950s, which changed the face of the South and this country. All of this near our sampling here. Right. So back to the lake, back to work. That morning we left Starkville around 4 a.m. In order to get to the lake around 6 to avoid the heat of the Mississippi summers. I had a couple of grad students with me, Sage from Japan and Chris from Iowa. When we were putting in at the golf ramp, we got one of those guys that really likes to talk. And they ask you questions, they're really interested in what you're doing, and you can hardly get rid of them, and you want to go on with your work. You guys might have run into some of those guys. But he did tell us that the lake was full of spotted bass. And I said to myself, you're crazy, there's no spotted bass in here. We sampled 14 lakes this year so far, and we haven't seen a single spotted bass. These lakes are too turbid. They just cannot support spotted bass. So we got started electrofishing, and that was surprise number one for me. I had a lot of surprises on this day. That was number one. We started getting spotted bass all over the place. I've never seen that many spotted bass since we've sampled a deep, clear lake in East Tennessee. As a standard procedure, around noon, we stop electrofishing and we go and collect water quality data. We often just find the deepest part of the lake and lower the hydro lab and out of the equipment. Surprise number two. The lake was about 8 meters deep and about 30 feet, which is unheard of in the Yazoo Basin, which is primarily small rivers, and you don't see these deep lakes until you go a little bit further west into the Mississippi River. After we get through collecting water quality, we're done. We head to the boat ramp, and we start loading up. And as we're loading up, we notice a couple sitting in their front porch watching us work. And I learned from experience that you have to go talk to them. You have to go tell them what you're doing, otherwise they're going to think the worst. Being accused of using feral equipment for collecting fish for fish fries. So we wanted to tell them what we were doing. So we talked to them for a little bit, and one of my students asked them, why is the lake so deep? And this was surprise number 3. The Ohio River went through here. What? You're just kidding me. I can tell you that the Ohio River actually goes about 250 miles north of where we were, and it joins the Mississippi River at Cairo, Illinois. So usually the drive from sampling sites to Starkville takes about 2 hours. It feels like 4 hours. I begin up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm being in the heat all day. We made it in 30 minutes. It was just so much excitement about the spotted bass. We were talking about how once upon a time, before they clear-cut the valley for agriculture, the lakes were clear, they were deeper, there were probably spotted bass everywhere. How spotted bass could be used as a poster child for restoration of this lake. And about could be Miss Lowry, that was her name, that thought that the Ohio River went right in front of her porch. Fast forward 2 years. Chris and Seiji, I graduated. I had 2 other grad students, Caroline and Dan, and they were going to study the effect of connectivity on fish assemblages. And there's this area called Bear Creek, which is also in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, not too far from McIntyre Lake, that has a set of lakes which is connected by a creek, and there's a few lakes outside the creek, some of which connect every year, some every 5 to 10 years. So it was a perfect location for study the effect of connectivity on fish assembly. So to find this lake, I went to Google Earth. This was 2008. I had just discovered Google Earth. I thought it was a cool tool that democratized the access to landscape data. And I spent a lot of time on Google Earth. So I was zoomed in and out in here, and I identified Bear Creek. And I noticed that there were some large patches of forest that resemble meandering river. I have outlined them in here to help you out. And the lakes that we had in our map, they were actually, most of them, in the bend of this old river. And then it dawned on me, gee, could Miss Lowry from 2 years ago be right? Could the Ohio River or some older prehistoric river run through here? And you would expect to see the lakes in the deep area because as the river fell, the deep areas of the rivers are on the bend, so those are the ones that are most likely to still have water. So I became fascinated by the subject, and I started spending a lot of time online looking for information about this. And I found this report that was written by Harold Fisk, who was a professor at LSU. It was done during the war for the Porcupine, and forgot what I was going to say. That's happening a lot nowadays. But anyways, I found a picture of Dr. Fisk showing his work to one of the colonels, and I suspect that this is some really sharp grad students. And what I'm going to show you now are some of those maps that came from Dr. Fisk's report. And this is the map in 1944, and it's been identified as 0 before present, present meaning 1944. I have labeled some of the major cities to give you an idea, and I have colored the Mississippi River, and that was what it was in 1944, and it's about what it is now. And the Ohio River coming in here at Hero. This one is 6,000 years before 1944. And as you can see, the Mississippi River was running much further west. It was hugging the western side of the valley, whereas nowadays it's on the eastern side. And this other river in here is actually the Ohio River. And the Ohio River, which now comes in at Cairo, was coming in close to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and in parallel, the Mississippi River. There's McIntyre Lake, so Miss Lowry was right on the money. I don't know how she knew, but she knew about it. This is 4,800 years before present. And as you can see, the Ohio River has migrated north, and it was coming in somewhere around Vicksburg. At 3,400, it was coming in somewhere around Memphis. And about 2,300 BP is around where it's now. Now, since Fisk worked, there's been a lot more research. And some of the states that he had identified have been demonstrated to be wrong. But the position of the river, he pretty much had those right. So the Ohio River was actually running through there. So given the diversity of ages of channels that we have in the alluvial, it's relevant to ask the question, does age shape abiotic and biotic patterns in this lake? So we have sampled 64 lakes. Out of the 64, we selected 15 prehistoric channels and 15 modern channels. The prehistoric channels, we selected those because we had the maps that Fisk and other geologists had produced, and they identified in there about the age that they were formed. The modern channels, most of them are channels that we had some history, written history on them, and a lot of them have been recently cut by the Corps of Engineers in order to channelize the river. So those folks are modern. Of the other lakes, we really couldn't tell whether they were prehistoric or modern, so we left them out. So what I'm going to show you is just based on those 30 lakes. I guess get the slide, but that's okay. I'll keep going. So we have collected various metrics on this 30 lakes, and we separated them into metrics that describe the lake, such as depth, width, length, connectivity, the amount of agriculture around the lake, and the amount of forest around the lakes. We had water metrics. Those are the things that we were collecting with the hydro lab in the lakes. That was temperature, DO, turbidity, nutrients data. We were collecting with water samples taken to the lab, chlorophyll A, and cyanobacteria, and Pachyindex cyanobacteria. And we also had fish data. So we compared each of these three classes between prehistoric and modern channels using multivariate analysis of variance, more specifically a permutation multivariate analysis. If it turned out that we found differences, we went and did an ordination to try to identify where the differences were. Well, it turned out that all three of them were different between modern and prehistoric channels. So we went and looked at the ordination. Not sure how much you understand from this ordination, but I'll just give a little crash course. Each of these points identify a lake, and each of these points was created with the set of variables. So points that are close together indicate that they are very similar in terms of these variables. Points that are far apart indicate that they're very different. As you can see, the most of the prehistoric lakes tend to bunch up at this side, and the modern lakes on this side. There's a good bit of overlap. Some the way the channels move around in this flat land, a channel may be left behind, and then it may be recaptured 300 or 500 years by another river or by the same river. So sometimes you may get a lot of noise in those data. The arrows indicate the correlation between each of the variables on axis 1 and axis 2. Width was correlated with axis 1, and agriculture was correlated with axis 1, and axis 2 also, but not as strong as axis 1. And so prehistoric lakes tend to be wider and have more agriculture around them, whereas the modern lakes have less agriculture, more forest, and they tended to be narrower, but they were deeper, and they have a higher connectivity with nearby rivers. Now, let's look at the water metrics. The same thing, the modern lakes to the right, the prehistoric to the left. So prehistoric lakes tended to have higher temperature, turbidity, total suspended solid, phosphorus, primary production, and higher nutrients, whereas the modern lakes tended to have higher dissolved oxygen and higher effective depth. If you project these arrows back to this side, it indicates that the modern lakes tended to be had lower temperature, lower turbidity, and lower suspended solids, etc. In general, the prehistoric lakes were, for the most part, hyper-eutrophic, and the modern lakes eutrophic. We don't have anything that's mesotrophic over there. It's just highly productive lakes. Now, we looked at the fish, and there was also a separation in terms of the type of species that you would find in prehistoric and modern lakes. Even that I'm in Idaho, I put a few pictures in here just in case you know which species we're talking about. Really, sunfish tended to be more abundant in the prehistoric lake. Gambusia, orange-spotted sunfish. Orange-spotted sunfish are real small sunfish that are very tolerant because they can come up to the surface and breathe oxygen in that 1 centimeter layer on the top of the water. The gars were also very abundant in the prehistoric channel. They can gulp air and come up out of the lake, and if they have to, they can skedaddle out of the lakes pretty quickly to agricultural ditches. Crappies were also very abundant in this lake, but these are very small crappie, not the kind that you would normally have in the fishery. In the modern lakes, we had the bluegills, the long ears, red ears, mostly centrarchic type species. If you think in terms of tolerance, the assemblage in the prehistoric lakes were mostly tolerant species, and in the modern lakes were mostly moderately tolerant species. So, connectivity, depth, and land use, which are important variables that drive this lake, are related to the age of the lake. As age increases, connectivity decreases, often as the river moves away from the channel, from the abandoned channel. As age increases, depth decreases as this lake accumulates sediment, and as age increases, agriculture around the lake increase because probably related to the connectivity issue, and the areas around the lake would flood less often, and they can be used for agriculture. Connectivity affects the fish assemblages directly by allowing exchange of fish between lakes and rivers. and it affects them indirectly by affecting the water physical characteristics, again, by water movement between the river and the lakes. Water physical characteristics also affect the water chemistry, which affect the fish assemblies. If we look at depths affect the fish assemblages directly by providing diversity in vertical habitat in the lakes. And depths affects or the effect of substrates is higher in shallower lakes because they're more likely to influence the water column than in a deep lake where the substrate has less influence in the water column. Substrates through nutrients are going to affect water chemistry, and the amount of wind and radiation in the lake, in shallow lakes, are going to substantially affect the water physical characteristics of the fish assemblages also affect the substrate by the steering effect of the bottom. Ag land use affect this affects depth through withdrawals and affects sediment by movement of suspended solids into the lakes, and they also affect nutrients as phosphorus and nitrogen are normally used as fertilizer. All of this affect the fish assemblages. So this was my attempt at summarizing the effect that age may have on this place. So a few conclusions. The extensive patchwork of oxbow lakes in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley represents a mix of modern and prehistoric channels, which they range anywhere from around 100 to 20,000 years old. There are no more lakes being created. Through channelization and levees, the Corps years has controlled the movement of the rivers. So, whereas before the 1800s, we had in the Yazoo Basin a new oxbow lake developed like every 25 to 50 years, and in the Mississippi River every 35 to 100 years. We're not getting any new oxbow lakes. Also, through sedimentation, we've quickly loosened the oxbow lakes that we have. Sedimentation rates have been measured about anywhere between 1 to 10 centimeters per year. And if you do the math, in 25 to 100 years, you're likely to lose a lot of lakes, which may have an average depth of about 1 to 2 meters. So we're not creating any lakes, and we're quickly losing the ones that we have. The diversity of ages supports the diversity of environments and diversity of biotic assemblages. There's about 98 fish species in this lake, about 50 mammal species, about 60% of the U.S. birds use this region, about 45 reptiles and amphibian species, and another 37 mussel species. So it's a region is highly diverse, and I think the diversity is provided by the variability in age in the lake, which affects variability in the environment. But we have a national treasure. I don't know how many of you guys watch Antique Roadshow. There was one time a guy that showed up with a Navajo blanket, and the appraiser looked at it and said, Oh, this is about $350,000. You have a national treasure. The guy said, well, he didn't back on my couch all this time. I think this is what we have in here. We have all of this lakes, which have high biotic diversity. They're just breathtakingly beautiful. If you actually walk into one of this, you feel like you step back 10 to 20,000 years. They have high biodiversity. They have a geologic record that reflects some of the glaciation that was going on in the northern United States. There's a distinct culture in the area, which I really do not have time to talk about. So we have a heritage that needs protection for future generations. My fantasy, and I realize this is a pipe dream, is to create the Mississippi Alluvial Valley National Park. We have few national parks in the east. Most of the parks are out here out west. But it's an uphill battle. They've been trying to create a national park in the Mobile Delta, and they've run into a lot of problems. And even the agricultural interest in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley is going to be very difficult to develop a national park. It's not going to happen during my watch. It's probably not going to happen during Tucker's watch. But you know, if we get started now by perhaps buying small parcels of land and start piecing it together, it may happen sometime. About 2 years ago, I went back and visited Miss Lowry. I was armed with several student theses, some agency reports, and several papers, and I was going to tell her all about everything that I've learned since she told me that the Ohio River was running in front of her house. I knew that she was probably not going to read them, but she'd probably appreciate me bringing them. But unfortunately, she had passed away. Got a little time to show you a few slides. Blues, this is where blues originated in this region. And there's a blues bar everywhere calling you away from Stillwater. They have a different cuisine. Anybody heard of hog maws? I think that they go by a different name in Pennsylvania, maybe. Hog maws are this thing right here, which is pig stomachs. They're very good. And you know, where else can you get a hog maw dinner for about $2.50? And I call $45 for a buck. I mean, it's just an awesome place to do research because of the rich culture and because of the biodiversity. So that's all I had to tell you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
We have plenty of time for questions if anybody has any.
So what caused the Ohio River to move so drastically?
I think I missed a slide, so thank you for asking. There's probably several causes. We had glaciation going on in the northern part of the country, and the ice sheets would form and they would melt. So as this form and melt, the amount of flow coming down the pipe to the Mississippi Alluvial Valley changed the hydrology and caused some of the channels to shift. And they would shift again once it started melting. That's one of them. Another possibility is the change in sea level. Sea level has gone up and down during that period, and it has affected the lower part of the Mississippi River Valley all the way up to this. Now, in the northern part, north of Memphis, between Memphis and St. Louis, you got the New Madrid Falls, and that has caused a lot of earthquakes, and that has caused the river to change significantly too. And I think there are others which are listed on my slide, but it's taking.
What are the regional climate change predictions for that area, and how are they likely to impact these lakes?
Yeah, good question. Good question. I know what the predictions are. Not so sure how they're going to impact it. According to the prediction, we're supposed to get the same amount of rain, except that the rain is going to shift further into the winter time. Okay, in this heavily agricultural area, putting a lot of rain during the winter time when there's no crops on the ground, I suspect that that is going to accelerate sedimentation risk. Well, I can come up with right now. Yes, sir.
How about going for a national wildlife refuge? Because it looks like the typical refuge with interspersed areas that could be protected, like as wetlands, and so forth, with private land sort of thing.
Yeah.
Use that as a stepping stone.
I know that's a good thought, and that had occurred to me. I think if we go for a national park, we get a national wildlife refuge. If we go for a national wildlife refuge, I'm not sure we get anything. That was the strategy. But yeah, we have to consider that. And in fact, there's this one small national wildlife refuge in the region, and it will be just a matter of buying up parcels to expand that.
So I don't know anything about fish, so I'm just going to preface my question with that. But is this a system that you could ask questions, or do people ask questions, sort of the inverse of island biogeography? So you've got all these islands, your wetlands. I mean, are there characteristics of the islands themselves that would affect the biodiversity, the variation in biodiversity you have among them, other than age and depth and some of the physical characteristics?
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, before they put the levees, the Mississippi River would come up and it would flood the entire region, and everything would get
Reconnected.
Yeah, reconnected. Everything would get reshuffled like share games, and then the water level would go down, and you would get different assemblages in each lake at random. But I suspect that eventually, because of the physical characteristics of the lake, they would take a certain direction and not change again until the next flood. But that's not happening now. The only time that we get any connection is whenever we have a really large flood that floods regional park. And I'm not sure how that lack of reshuffling is affecting the fish assembly.
I saw a couple of the photos that you have, the bald cypress growing in those lakes. Do those have a big, I mean, is there a lot of variability in the amount of bald cypress growing along the edges of the lakes? And
Oh yeah, it's in fact, some of the lakes are full of bald cypress and tubular gum. They begin growing in the edges and on the ends, and as the lake shallows up, eventually they get completely split.
And did you find any correlation between how many of the trees there are, biodiversity. It seems like they could influence a lot of factors within. I could probably increase how quickly it sorts up.
Right, yeah. We really need to sample a lot of lakes with trees, because usually those are the ones that are very shallow, and that's why the trees are able to grow in there. And in terms of collecting fish with electrofishing, we're usually looking for at least 2 feet of water. So most of the lake that we focused on was primarily lakes that did have 3 feet or deeper. I think we're going to see a big contrast. We've been able to sample some of the older lakes, some of the shallow lakes with large amounts of trees, which you can just change the whole environment by providing shade to the lake, by providing leaves.
I got one, Steve. How about commenting on the subsistence fishing that goes on tonight? I noticed you've got catfish and buffalo on there, but tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, there's a big subsistence fisheries in this area. In fact, I mentioned this, but this is the poorest area in North America. It's almost like going into a third world country in here. I even show you some of the shacks that are in his farms. And a lot of the people have, they fish to provide food, or if they're unemployed, that's all they fish. And the fishery is primarily buffalo, big mouth buffalo and smallmouth buffalo, paddlefish. There's paddlefish everywhere in this place. A major problem, which also I can get to, is the amount of contaminants in the soil. So I suspect that something like 30% of the lakes have signs that tell you to eat fish out of this lake only once a month. Nevertheless, there's a strong fishery, and they pack those fish and send them to the markets in Chicago, even though those guys up there don't know where they keep. I'm serious. I saw them interviewed in the news one time, and that's why they said, we can't eat them, so we send them to Chicago. But yes, there's a large subsistence fishery, mostly for buffalo. And the area has a large aquaculture part. I think in one of the photos that I had in there from Google Earth, you can see some aquaculture complexes.
All right, well, let's give them one big round of applause.
Appreciate you showing up on Friday afternoon.
See you.